Welcome to Malifaux University. 202. Markers. A significant game mechanic is the use of markers to represent various effects and events. You must have markers before you start playing the game, so take the time to make or purchase the markers you will need according to the models you use. Many companies make wood or plastic markers with faction logos and color schemes, and some individuals even 3D print them. This player thinks it's more fun to create your own markers with your personal style and flair to match your crew, but that's just one opinion. When you're starting out, you can download and print a complete set of every marker and token in the game through our Patreon or on Wargames Vault. Links are in the notes below. So what is a marker? Unless otherwise specified, there are some common rules that all markers share. Naturally, if something on a model's stat card contradicts these rules or says something different, go with what's on the card. In essence, a marker is a 30mm base that has been labeled or marked for a specific purpose. They usually do not count as terrain, and even though they have a physical presence on the playing area, your models can walk over and through them like the markers aren't even there. Your models can also usually see through markers, so don't even think that hiding behind a dead body will block line of sight. The most common markers are scheme markers and markers that represent a dead body of some sort. Scheme markers are dropped by a model taking the interact action during its activation. There are rules about when you can and cannot take this action, but that's a matter for another video. Your scheme markers will ideally represent your crew or faction in an interesting and thematic way. Jacob Lynch owns the Honeypot Casino, so these scheme markers have playing cards on them. The Dreamer is a psychopathic child who astrally projects into Malifaux, so these scheme markers have toy blocks on them. Use your imagination and have fun with making your scheme markers. Dead body markers are one of two types, corpse and scrap markers. Models that have the living, undead, or beast characteristics drop a corpse marker into base contact with the model when it is killed. Models with the construct characteristic drop a scrap marker when killed. If a model has construct and another characteristic, you get to choose which marker it drops when it dies. Take note that models that have none of these four characteristics drop no markers when they die. Imagine their malevolent bodies just dissipate in a cloud of evil vapor. In order to expedite gameplay and to keep the playing area from becoming needlessly cluttered, ask your opponent if her models need to use corpse or scrap markers for anything. If she doesn't need them, and if you don't need them, then there's no need to waste time dropping them unless the game's schemes or strategies call for them. Markers are placed on the table with one of two action words, drop and create. If you drop a marker, which is most common, just put it where the action or ability says to put it. You can put it in base contact or even underneath another model in range. And in case some game effect talks about moving a marker, dropping a marker does not count as moving it. If the game effect says the marker is created, on the other hand, you put it anywhere within range, but the marker you create cannot overlap any other markers. It can't even touch any models other than the model that created it, unless the game effect that creates the marker specifically says otherwise. If the marker you create has the impassable trait, meaning that models cannot walk through it, then it cannot overlap the base of any model or other impassable terrain like a building or a big rock. Some models and game effects will use markers during the game or create special markers of their own. We can look at the infamous crew of Captain Zip for examples of how this works. When this wrestler uses his wrestle attack, he has the option to remove a non-scheme marker within 2 inches. This could be a corpse marker, a scrap marker, or another special marker created by another model. Then he makes the attack, and, if successful, uses that removed marker to give the defending model the injured condition. Earl Burns, Captain Zip's totem, has the free loot bonus action. Once per turn, he can place himself into base contact with an enemy scheme marker within 3 inches, remove that scheme marker, and then draw a card. Captain Zip and McTavish both create markers that count as terrain. McTavish has a swamp screen bonus action that creates a swamp screen marker on a 50mm base. Captain Zip, meanwhile, has the comical Drop the Pianos tactical action that allows him to create as many as 3 piano markers on 40mm bases once per turn. Why do these markers count as terrain? Because in their descriptions they have qualities of terrain like blocking, impassable, concealing, and so on. Terrain traits will be discussed in another video. Just keep in mind that because both of these actions say create, neither the swamp screen markers nor the piano markers can overlap any other markers on the playing area or touch any other model when created except for the models creating them. If a model can drop a marker that counts as terrain, it cannot cover another marker. For example, if this Ostriger uses his Kick Up Dust bonus action to drop a 50mm dust cloud marker on top of a nearby scheme marker, the scheme marker is simply placed on top of the dust cloud marker since the dust cloud has the concealing and severe traits and therefore counts as terrain. Markers don't float either, so if a marker is on top of a piece of terrain and moved off of it somehow, or the terrain is destroyed, the marker just falls straight down. In the case of this dust cloud marker, the card says it is removed at the end of the turn, so we take the dust cloud marker away and replace the scheme marker where it was. Markers that are not terrain can usually be stacked without a problem. It doesn't matter which one is on top, they all count as being there. If a model is standing on top of a marker, it does not count as blocking that marker if both the model and the marker have the same base size. If a model with a base larger than the base of the marker stands on top of it though, then no one would be able to see or interact with that marker until the model moves off, in most cases. There are more advanced rules about line of sight related to the size of the models involved, but that will be included in another video. When you're just starting out, keep it simple. The interact action is how most models drop a scheme marker. When you use it, you place one scheme marker in base contact with the model doing it, as long as where you drop it isn't within 4 inches of another friendly scheme marker. If your model has special ways of dropping scheme markers with actions or abilities on their cards, those scheme markers can go anywhere, regardless of where other scheme markers are. It's only dropping scheme markers with the interact action that has this 4-inch restriction. You can also use interact to remove all the scheme markers in base contact with a model, friendly or otherwise. Interact does not affect corpse or scrap markers, but the slam general action can move or remove some impassable or destructible terrain markers. Some models have special abilities or actions that let them remove markers in other ways. Let's look at an encounter with McTavish and Coppelius. Coppelius drops a scheme marker, careful to keep it at least 4 inches away from the other scheme marker his crew dropped earlier that McTavish is now standing next to. He then slinks away, avoiding a confrontation with the Bayou henchman. McTavish activates and uses Interact to remove the Neverborn scheme marker right next to him. He then walks over to the other one, but that's his second action. He cannot use Interact to remove the scheme marker. That's where his Gator Snack bonus action comes in. He can target any nearby scheme, scrap, or corpse marker, remove it, and then flip a card to apply a special effect. Being able to affect corpse and scrap markers is an unusual ability though, and most models won't be able to do something like this. One important rule about markers that has caused many players confusion is the rule that states, when a model drops a marker, it is friendly to the crew controlling the model that dropped it. Normally, this wouldn't be a big deal, but sometimes a model can control a model in his opponent's crew and make that enemy model drop a marker. We'll give examples of this in a later video, but if Model A in one crew can somehow control Model B in the other crew and make Model B drop a scheme or some other kind of marker, that marker belongs or is friendly to Model A's crew, not Model B's. The last kind of marker is the strategy marker. When you're playing a game, you'll usually play one of 4 strategies. These will be discussed in a later video, but you should make these markers according to their descriptions in the core rulebook before playing your first game. Turf War needs 5 markers that can show control by either crew or neither. Plant Explosives needs markers that represent bombs. Corrupted Idols needs 5 markers that both crews will push around. Reckoning just needs a lot of corpse markers. All of these printable markers are available at our Patreon and at Wargames Vault. To recap, markers are essential to gameplay. These special bases go on the playing area and represent various events. Scheme markers should be themed for your crew or faction. You should probably prepare 10 to 12. You'll need enough corpse markers to cover all of your models with the living, undead, and beast characteristics. You'll need scrap markers for any models with the construct characteristic. Depending on your crew, it's entirely possible you won't have any construct models, but it's always wise to have a few scrap markers on hand regardless. Strategy markers are unique to the shared strategies of the games you'll play, so review those requirements in the core rulebook. Finally, you'll need whatever special markers your models need: swamp screens, pianos, dust clouds, even blast markers, which are indicated by the little mushroom cloud in the variable profile of some models' attacks. If you don't have your special markers ready, you'll find it difficult to use those attacks and abilities in a game. On a final note, many players confuse markers and tokens. The simple way to keep them straight is that markers go on the mat and tokens don't. Tokens go on your model's cards or elsewhere on the table. That's the overview of markers. Pick up a printable set of all the markers and tokens you need to play Malifaux in the Wargames Vault. If you haven't already, join our Patreon for early, ad-free access to all new content, and be sure to visit the Malifaux University gift shop for the latest in Malifaux-themed shirts, hoodies, drinkware, and more. Links are in the notes below. And remember, play friendly games, keep it simple, and have fun.